Having heard from Alessandro and Alban in the short and medium-term impacts of working under uncertainty, I wanted to take a view on a few longer-term issues. I think it's true that we're certainly living in unprecedented times, and I doubt that the world's ever seen such a rapid total lockdown of the economy. And in the interest of continuity and providing quotes to start each section, I think it certainly makes Neil Bohr's comment from 1920 ring true that prediction is very difficult, especially when it's about the future. If you can move to the next slide. As we think about the role of FP&A in such challenging times, let me just take a moment or two to reflect on how we think about and deal with uncertainty. I'm sure many of you have different mental models of how to approach this, but in general, there are all some sort of variant of this cone of uncertainty. As time extends, the range of plausible outcomes broadens, and I'd say that in the current environment, we're heading towards an infinitely unpredictable uncertainty. The rules of the game have changed, but the new rules haven't been unveiled. As I mentioned earlier, at Unit 4, we are trying to play offense and defense simultaneously, making sure that we don't just hunker down, but that we continue to drive and push for opportunity, while at the same time looking to where we can remove discretionary or less productive spend. Larissa had shared earlier the unknown knowns and the known unknowns, and many commentators and public figures, including Rumsfeld, have referred to, but not always in a helpful, meaningful, or understandable way. So I've tried to characterize what these conditions actually mean for us and how we can think about behaving or acting or tending to act under different situations. Firstly, the things we know, or facts, conditions and outcomes that are measurable or can be estimated with some certainty. And this is what we face in the majority of real life situations under normal circumstances. Secondly, there's the things that we know that we don't know, or you could say questions. The majority of situations we face in our businesses when unusual or special situations arise. However, we often tend to underestimate the risk of these situations due to their uniqueness. When we wander down into the unknown knowns, this is where we need to apply intuition. Often we don't want to believe or act as we should. Again, driving an underestimation of risk due to judgmental bias, irrationality, or wishful thinking. And finally, the unknown unknowns, or the black swan events, where we're confronted with unexpected or surprising events with severe consequences, and where we have no precedent or touchstone as to how to respond or act. And in these situations, exploration is often the only way to adapt. As discussed earlier, the adoption of scenario planning models that Alban talked to helps us to think about how we address these infinite outcomes. But there are always naturally constraints around how many variables that you want to use to have something that's manageable. And there's many other techniques that I'm sure people are familiar with, such as real options and simulation models that may add more rigor, although not necessarily lead to better decision making. If we turn to the next slide, and looking at the time horizon for decision making, and I think that's where we probably start to think differently from what we've just learned or experienced. Many decisions that we make don't have short or mid-term impacts. Looking at how risk can be balanced against uncertainty in making those decisions can lead to more involvement from FP&A in determining the appropriate approach. To take a few examples, new product development, market entry, real estate, and manufacturing facility decisions can often have lead times extending over several years, and in large-scale infrastructure projects, sometimes even decades. Looking at how we de-risk these decisions can lead to a whole set of different evaluations, both strategic and operational, that the FP&A function could be called upon to lead. For example, these may include co-innovation agreements, partnering or JV structures, flexible real estate models based on new ways of working. And I think that's going to be one of our new normals to the extent it isn't already post-COVID-19. And looking at outsourcing or contract manufacturing, where, for example, the product differentiation isn't in the build, but rather in design or in IP. In each situation, being able to model and understand how the economics of the business may change, but in return for a better risk profile in an uncertain world, are all areas where FP&A can take the lead. If we move to the next slide. All of the above creates a need for a continued evolution and upskilling of the FP&A function. I'm sure all have some familiarity with the maturity model, moving from our basic reporting capability at the lower end through to leading business partnering attributes on the right-hand side. So I think, as we saw in the poll, everyone sees the value in investing and driving an acceleration towards that leading end state. So if we just move to the next slide, I'll just touch on some of the elements of the attributes of the leading definition. I'm not going to read it through, but a couple of points that I'd specifically call out or features. Integration appears in a number of aspects of the model, both in the planning process and how systems and models are connected. And it's critical that each view of the business is reflected in the process and that models are integrated and not separate standalone systems bridged by Excel. We're in the process of undergoing a finance transformation program at Unit 4, and one of my objectives is to remove Excel from our modeling. Flexible and real-time are terms that also appear often, and given what we've talked about today and the need to be able to adapt in an agile way to changing scenarios, we need to ensure that we're dealing with one version of the truth and that our applications and tools allow us to respond in real time to changing events. And as we said right at the start, FP&A are placed to hold the pen and take the leadership role in driving plans and actions to help the business evolve and thrive. So on the final slide, just to summarize, in the long-term view, we need to be able to deal with increased uncertainty and range of outcomes by making decisions in a way that can mitigate that uncertainty and risk, and for FP&A to take the lead in driving factual, analytically sound support to business planning decisions.